Yeah, don't worry about it.
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Jeremy Hardy, and I work for Men Can Stop Rape as a training and technical assistance manager. And I'm really excited to be here today for our 10th conversation for the National Healthy Masculinity Conversation Series, where we're really going to focus on athletics in prevention. And I'm just so pleased to have our colleagues here from Doane University and Hastings College and Willamette University, who are all going to be on for this conversation, which is part one. We're going to hear from all these different professionals talking about, the collaboration between athletics and prevention efforts as it intersects with others as well. And then next week, we'll tune in and hear directly from some student athletes from these different universities and get to hear how has it impacted them as well. So folks, I feel like, why don't we just get started with introductions, and we can just go around and say, who we are and where we work. And from that place, we can start to get into the conversation. So Jay, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Page. I'm the Senior Director of National Programs for Men Can Stop Rape. I'm just very excited about today's conversation here with our colleagues from Hastings, Doane, and Willamette, and excited to learn, excited to hear from them and to learn from them. So I'll pass it over to Susanna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susanna, she, her pronouns. I am the Campus Advocacy, Prevention, and Education Project, so we'll probably refer to that as CAPE Project throughout. I'm the project director. I'm also a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist at Doane University in Nebraska. I guess I'll pass over to Matt.
All right. My name is Matt Franzen, and I am the head football coach at Hastings College in Nebraska, formerly the head football coach and then athletic director at Doane University, also in Nebraska, where I worked with Susanna, as we will be discussing. Andrea, you're up.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Huthmeyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Willamette University. I'm the director of our Gender Resource and Advocacy Center. And in that role, I coordinate prevention efforts on campus, as well as serve as a direct service confidential advocate for our student survivors. I'm also responsible for coordinating a lot of activities just centered around community building and anti-oppression, gender equity, particularly for our LGBTQ students. So go ahead, Kip, if you want to round us out.
Thanks, partner. Kip Ione, Willamette University, head men's basketball coach and also founder Teams of Men. Been here, this will be my 13th season as the head coach here at Willamette. Been here since 1997 when I got recruited out of the snow of Billings, Montana into the rain of Salem, Oregon. And I'm so glad to be here today with everybody, including Andrea, who's a great partner and resource for me here on campus.
Well, thank you, everyone. And so I guess to get us started, I was just hoping to share a little bit of a story and learn from you all, yours as well, as we get into the conversation. So just to give us a sort of overview, we're really interested in, there were two themes that kind of came up while we were preparing for the conversation. One was about buy-in, and then one was about kind of what you do once you've bought in. As we're talking about, athletics departments on campuses, collaborating with other offices, including prevention, advocacy, diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, in doing all these different kinds of work that the different departments and offices do. And so I, as a former student athlete, got to experience really both sides of the table, as it were, having been in the room when we had, required programming that my team attended, and to have been the one offering that required programming that my team attended. And I just want to lift up my coach, who I love and who has shaped my life so much. Because when I went to him as a student, as a sophomore, and I told him that I had just learned that sexual assault was a problem and that I wanted to do something about it on campus, he was frank with me about not really being the expert to talk about sexual assault specifically. And yet he was so encouraging and so supportive and pointed me right to resources on campus where I could learn more about the issue. And I think that it's telling that the first person I went to when I wanted to talk about sexual assault on campus was my coach. And so it was out of that place that I would say our team dynamic as a whole, the athletics department at Goucher College, where I attended, was able to grow in their efforts to engage student athletes in conversations that are like this, that are about creating a safer culture and safer environment. And, I'll just lift up, his philosophy was do the right thing. That's what he told us from day one. And so I'm just so thankful to Men Can Stop Rape, because I was able to attend the training institute that we offer as a student athlete. And that work, that training has been able to offer me an understanding of, an appreciation for how athletics is transformational in creating culture, and in creating a culture in a pro-social way, taking a strength-based approach that we lift up as part of our work at Men Can Stop Rape. And so I guess I'm just curious, to give everybody a chance to hear from you all, why we're here having this conversation today. And Andrea, if I might ask you to lead us off, I'm thinking of the email that you sent way back in May of, gosh, was it 2019, 2020? And thinking about, the opportunity that this conversation is. Can I ask you to lead us off with what you were hoping this conversation could be, and why it's important that we're here, and just give everybody else a chance after that to go and say, what value they see in having this conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. It was probably about a year ago, once COVID was setting in, where, so many aspects of our lives started changing. And for me, I had, been working really closely with a student athlete in preparation for Sexual Assault Action Month, Awareness Month activities and programming. And so much of that had to be either canceled or tweaked to be some sort of virtual scenario. And, it just got me thinking more so too about the ways our, all of our lives are changing, but particularly for the student athletes. And, thinking through the work I had done kind of throughout the year, just building those relationships, building the partnerships with coaches and student athletes to increase that engagement. So I remember reaching out to you and just thinking, gosh, on a national scale, I bet so many coaches and athletes are just grappling with, not only identity, within their sport and not being able to compete and play and team building dynamics, but also how are they engaging with, these other partners across campus for things that they're really passionate about. So I kind of was seeking out some support maybe, and also just an opportunity to process this experience with other colleagues. So I'm glad that here we are a year later. At least COVID kind of generally is improving, although I know it's been a really tough year for many. So I'm glad that we have the opportunity to just talk a little bit more about our work and how we continue to engage students.
And so I want to lift up, the part of what you said about, being considerate of and thinking of, compassionate towards the student athletes on campus and the change, that is happening to their livelihood and the commitments that they had made to be part of a team, and how they were experiencing this moment, that you as a professional in your role and all the different things that you do to have been thoughtful about that within your role. And so I guess, Kip, I'm curious to hear, if I can pass it to you next to just add on and build on to what Andrea just said. And then Susanna and Matt, pass it over to you next.
Yeah, I think for myself, in the entry point into awareness of the hard work and the expertise and the resources that folks like Andrea and Susanna can be for coaches like Coach Matt and myself, really was like an awakening, so to speak. Woke is used so often nowadays. I think it was really a lot of self-reflection for me around some events, 2012, 2013, in the Willamette community. In Salem, Oregon, where we're located. In general, there was just a clustering of sexual assault and some violence happening to women that, because I've been here so long as a player, assistant coach, and now the head coach, a lot of folks with connections to the school, connections to our program would reach out to me and say, hey, I saw this in the news. I saw this on Twitter. I saw this back then when there were maybe still had newspapers that were surviving. What is going on? And unfortunately, but maybe, a blessing in a lot of ways, it really hit me hard that my answer was always only, well, it's not my guys. It's not my particular players. But in hindsight, and really laying in bed at night and keeping my wife up while talking out loud about these things, there was nothing I had done as the coach. Coach and Coach Matt can probably speak to this. You're into the business of preparing your kids to succeed, whether that's on the basketball court or you claim in your recruiting, you claim in your own brain that foundationally you're about preparing your kids for success in life. But I could really point to nothing in what I had done as a coach at that time that would allow my guys to have better decision-making paradigms and not make the choices that some other people had made. So I hadn't done anything, and it's just been really the lottery luck of a flip of a coin, that my guys hadn't been ones perpetrating this harm in the area. And I really couldn't live with that anymore. So, that was really my decision, hey, I got to learn more myself. I got to dive into, really, it started on the prevention side and expanded itself into all the things that can contribute to these things. And that's where I've existed since. Like that's a core tenet of our program. It's what we do here. 15 to 20 times a year, we're either creating our own content or working with Andrea and other people from across the country to put these types of conversations in front of our players and make them grow, and not just their awareness, but also their willingness to take that knowledge and education and go forward and try to spread a better version of manhood.
And so I want to get into that piece that you shared about, the content and the conversations, and learn more about it. And before we do that, I just, Susanna, at this point, you're a return guest on these conversations. So I'm so glad to have you back. And I just want to pass it to you and Matt to talk a little bit about, similarly, where you found value in having this kind of conversation. And I'm thinking of, the Campus Athletics Project and all that CAPE has become. And so, yeah, I'm going to just pass it to you.
Oh, pressure's on. So I think, to reflect on some of what Andrea and Kip said, actually, the first thing is having the response to what is being shut down by COVID, that, it looks different for everyone. And we are grateful that we have athletes who have not lost family members or friends, but at the same time, they have lost a sense of identity if they are unable to play. And so how do we help them see that they extend beyond what athlete or what sport they play, right? And so one of the things that, and identity with our specifically male athletes is something that Matt and I have talked about a lot since I started at Doane when he was, the football coach, and really talking about how we talk about women's athletics as like, oh, so-and-so plays this sport, but we talk about men's as such and such player. And that's all their identity becomes. And so it becomes actually like a retention issue as well when something like this happens. So how are you going to provide that identity that is external to the sport that they play? So I wanted to touch on that briefly because I think that that's such an important piece of the work that we're doing and this conversation. For myself, I have always viewed athletics as the leaders on campus. And I think, I never wanted to come into the conversation and be the lady yelling about sexual assault at them, right? I don't yell, first off, but I didn't want them to view me that way. And I think it was really important for me to create an environment with them that they felt they were partners with me in the work and that I saw them as leaders. Like, I need you to lead in this area so that our full community can be better. And that's the approach that I've taken with our athletics department specifically. And it's been really wonderful to see some of the shifts that we've seen with athletes, some of the shifts we've seen with coaches. And now that we are moving into introducing a female student athlete program as well, how that will complement the Engaging Men program that we have as well within athletics.
Well, thank you for that. And Coach Matt, and you're in an interesting position having been head coach at Doane University, then AD, and now again head coach at Hastings, for your interest and its enduring nature in having this conversation and doing this work. Please go ahead. Where do you see the value in having this conversation?
When I first started into this with Susanna at Doane in what was it, Susanna, 16 or 17?
17.
For me in the beginning, it was all about prevention, and kind of like Kip said, when things are going to happen, when things do happen, the last thing as a coach that you want is to find out that your athletes were involved, and the prevention piece of it, and not just, it's not okay if it's somebody else's team and not my own. So maybe we can do a good job in preventing campus wide. As a parent of two daughters, I would be remiss if I didn't admit that selfishly, I think that probably plays, at least at the beginning for sure, played a role in my interest in getting involved. And my girls are young enough that college is still a ways away, but having been a college male at one point and seen things that were not appropriate, trying to create a better environment for them when they get there. And then once we got into it, the thing that I loved in the presenting, really loved as a coach, still enjoyed when I became the athletic director and then was involved in presenting to all of our men's teams, but I didn't feel it on the same level as I did with my own team, was the amount of trust that you are able to build with your student athletes. And I've never coached a women's team. As a male coach, it'd be very difficult to present on some of these things for me to a women's team, even if I was their coach. But with a men's team, the conversations that we have in this work, and when Susanna and I have presented together, we're always very deliberate at the beginning of saying to the group, we need you to be your authentic self. We need you to be non-judgmental of the teammate next to you, and we need you all to be willing to share what's in your heart. And you're not all going to be coming at this from the same place, and that's part of the learning. But we have to trust each other in this work, and then we have to trust that when we walk out of here, that we're all on the same team. And then let's jump in and get to work, and that includes the coaches also. But the amount of trust that goes into this, if it's done right, leads to an incredible opportunity for team building. And that's one of the things when I moved out of coaching at Doane into the athletic director job, one of the things that I really missed, which was part of what drove me to get back into coaching now at Hastings, was just what I said, the opportunity to be involved in this kind of really deep relationship building with young men. And as Kip would say, we love being on the sidelines, we love competition, that's part of it, but the long lasting stuff is this type of work and the relationships that you build. So that's where I have really learned to enjoy this work, is in the relationships and the trust.
Thank you, Coach. And I just want to lift that up. You talked about relationships. We all talked, beforehand about that's the foundation. And you mentioned that word trust. You said it about 3-4 times while you were talking, and it, that truly is the foundation. So for you being a coach, and Kip as well, but for Andrea and Susanna, I just want us all to talk about it, but I want to start with you both. Where, as far as being advocates and prevention specialists and having those many different roles on campus with those responsibilities of doing the work, how did you start that relationship and that trust? Susanna, we heard so many stories about you and Coach Matt working together. How did that start? And where did y'all, we always talk about meeting each other where we are. Can you talk about that and what it looked like in this relationship for, all those campuses watching and people that are prevention specialists trying to really, truly engage cross-department with athletics directors and departments and coaches?
Yeah, absolutely. I will, first and foremost, I think it's really important for me to say how lucky I was to have a coach like Matt on campus. I recognize that not everybody, and I'm sure, Andrea, you feel similarly, right? Not everybody is going to have a coach who jumps at the chance to be involved in this kind of work. And so I recognize that part of it was luck, right? But that said, it really is coming at it from the same place that we ask our athletes to come at the work, from an authentic and non-judgmental place. So you can't know where somebody is to meet them there until you get to know them. And so just asking questions, inquiring about, what are the things we've done in the past? What does it look like for you? What are some of your values, your beliefs? And one of the things that I've really noticed in particularly moving to Nebraska from the West Coast is if I place my conversations as values-based conversations, then they are much easier to have across ideological or political differences, right? It brings the conversation to something that everybody can relate to. What are your values and how do they drive you? So taking that approach, when it came to creating relationships with the teams, again, it was just really being authentically myself. We started with football, and I felt like I had a little bit of a way in because I grew up watching football. And my nephew played for years, right? And with baseball, I played softball for about a decade. And so I had these ways in with certain athletes, but when it came to other things, I had like wrestling, we would walk in and I'd be like, I don't know what you do. Right. And so just being completely honest with them and bringing my full self, because I was expecting to bring their full self. And so they were able to start to identify that I was never going to, get mad at them for who they authentically were, but we might have a conversation about how that portrayed their values. I think, people are a product of how they grow up. These types of ideas and specifically like rape culture beliefs and rape myth beliefs, those are taught. And so we have to understand that that's just all this person knows. So how do we help them shift ever so slightly by having really authentic values-based conversations with them and educating rather than yelling at? If I walked in and said, hey, some of you are rapists and I need the other ones to hold people accountable, everyone's going to stop listening to me. But if I walk in and I say, hey, here's the stereotype and I don't believe it. Do you? Let's work on this stereotype together. That has much more impact. And so I think just coming at it from a really authentic place and understanding the pressures and the struggles around being specifically a male student athlete, and recognizing that was beneficial to creating those relationships with athletes.
I would say when I think back to kind of the timing and when I arrived and when I was kind of tasked with the prevention responsibilities, my first, step was really identifying where this work is maybe being done in a less visible way on campus. And that immediately brought me to Kip and just connecting with him to say, well, I hear that you're doing this program about masculinity with your athletes. Tell me more about that. And kind of sharing with him, similarly, like a values-based conversation. Here's my approach to the work. Here's, some stuff I have in mind, and that created maybe a foundation of understanding of the potential that we had to continue to expand in athletics. I'd also say it was kind of a matter of just scarcity, right? And capacity building being a strategic way to grow our resources. I think especially with smaller universities, we all wear many hats, and would love to have multiple staff involved in outlining and, executing this type of work. But we don't. So my intention too was to kind of gain exposure with the coaching staff, and really think about who my partners could be initially, and then how I could get insight into, other either programs that coaches, felt strongly tied to, or kind of other just characteristics, about them personally, or, what they were passionate about with their student athletes. So that was certainly like a part of that kind of strategic planning effort. I would say, the next step then, having to devote time to building these relationships one-on-one with coaches, was really valuable for me and the work that we've done in our department. Thinking through like what the specifics were of, their leadership kind of mantras that they, tell their athletes. What sort of kind of coaching philosophies do you have? And basically mapping that out, even, a lot of Google Doc sharing, to figure out how can I translate or transfer, this, value statement from like this, coaching perspective to prevention, right? How can something about, a way that they're going to show up and play the game, how can that translate to being an active bystander and disrupting those stereotypes, or intervening, when there's a potentially, bad thing going on. So that was some of my approach, I suppose, when it comes to, I guess gaining the trust and kind of using that appeal of partnership and just community. Because, at the end of the day, it is about kind of the shift on our campus and making sure we're all kind of engaging and committed to the common goal of ending violence.
Thank you. So listening to you both, you both use that simple approach, that strength-based approach, right? Both of you talked about noticing that value in the athletics department and the coaches and the players as leaders, right? As leaders on campus. And thank you for sharing that. I think that's something that we definitely want to keep in mind and keep at the forefront is, the strength-based approach, going into those conversations, into those meetings with a positive, open mind, right? We both talked about breaking down those stereotypes and starting from that blank piece of paper, right? And mapping out what that relationship is looking like at the moment and going to look like. So thank you both for that. Jeremy?
And Jason, adding to the strength-based approach, something that we talked about in some of our prep conversations, I heard just now from Susanna and Andrea about meeting people where they are, meeting coaches where they are, meeting players where they are. And I just love that idea of, what is the value system of this team? What is your coaching philosophy? And what can I take from that and apply to this aspect of, the goals that are associated with my role and how I'm trying to support all students, and how your students are uniquely positioned to continue spreading that message, to be, messengers, and to be bought in, to be, active members of the community in that way. And so it makes me think, about like we're talking here about trust and building relationships, meeting people where they are, taking a strength-based approach. And I would love to hear, specific stories of all those different things. But I am curious, also to hear you all talk about, okay, so now that you're starting to build a relationship and you're, getting in the door, I guess, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm curious to hear from the coaches, whether you're the one doing the approaching or the one who has been approached. We just heard from our colleagues in advocacy and prevention about, meeting athletics where they are. I'm curious to hear about coaches and athletes meeting prevention and advocacy specialists where they are, and what it was like, whether you were on the receiving end of being approached or you were the one doing the approaching. How was that experience for you all? And I'll let you two pick who's going to go first.
I would say in my experience, it was a matter of recognizing, this is something I think all coaches have this skill set, and we don't necessarily always apply it in the spaces where we can use it. We love applying. I need to know more. I need to be up to date. I need to be advanced in my scheming and my system. So I'm willing for professional development outreach. Nothing stops us from calling or emailing each other about offense and defense. Nothing stops us from grabbing and stealing and utilizing X's and O's stuff from the internet. But then when it comes to this prevention work or advocacy work or being, learning about healthy relationships, unlearning, like some of the stuff you mentioned, Andrea and Susanna, unlearning socialized behaviors of men, we like to freeze and stop ourselves at, well, I don't know enough. When these people exist on our campuses, like these folks have been doing the work, they have degrees in the work, they're there. So for me, the impetus when I was like, I'm doing a program, I don't know what it's going to look like yet. I do know I don't know enough. But why would that stop me from reaching out? Who at the time it was Carly Roner, and then now I'm lucky enough to have Andrea as well in that role. These people are there. So where can I go start to learn things in base level 1 for freshmen? Prevention work, awareness of sexual assault, statistics across the country. They're going to be the first stop, and they'll probably send me in 30 places, which is the same thing I would use for ball screen defense. If we were terrible at ball screen defense, nothing on earth would stop me from finding experts to steal from. So I think for coaches, sometimes that's a stopping point, Jeremy, of, man, I don't know enough, I'm done. When really it's just applying a skill they already have. How do I find new knowledge and learn how to sequence it? I go to experts, and those experts are here.
Thank you, Kip.
Yeah, and for me, I guess I'm thinking back and trying to put it all back in chronological order, but when this program was presented to us at Doane, it was about the time that Mike Riley was the head football coach at the University of Nebraska, which is just right up the road from where Doane is at, and he had brought a victim to speak to his Nebraska football team, and she had been a student, I believe, at Oregon State, where some of the football athletes were involved in an assault. And anyway, he brought her to speak to the Nebraska football team, and it was just locally, it made huge news. And I saw that, and it kind of put it on the radar for me. And I thought at that point, maybe there's something that we can do with our team to present and to get this work started. I hadn't met Susanna yet at the time. And shortly thereafter, I was approached by our athletic director at Doane, and she had mentioned that we're applying for a grant for a program, and we would need an athletic department representative to be in on this if we're granted the grant to go to Washington, D.C. And when she started, I thought, okay, you as the female athletic director are the obvious choice to be the person. And the more she talked, the light bulb went off. Oh, you're talking about me doing this. And at the end of the conversation, I said, well, I mean, yeah, that sounds good. And it led to another meeting on campus with a grant coordinator. And before long, we were off on a plane to Washington, D.C. To go to the workshop and get things started. And then I met Susanna, and it was on from there. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of a rambling answer, as I generally give, but that's how I maybe fell into this. But like I said, I think the whole Mike Riley situation had maybe opened the door for me, and then the timing with the opportunity we were given at Doane to jump into the program, for me, timing was everything. And as soon as we got started, like I said earlier, I was all in once we had a chance to get our feet wet.
Well, and a thank you to Mike Riley for that work, and for Brenda Tracy, who's a survivor in that situation, and lifting up her leadership. That all these years later, Matt, I'm thinking of how this connects to and leads to my next question, which is to ask you all about the programs that you would do and that you have been implementing. For Men Can Stop Rape, the Healthy Masculinity Athletics Project that we created in partnership with the U.S. Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women and Positive Coaching Alliance was a real opportunity for us to centralize an environment and a space in which, you know, the Title IX coordinators and prevention specialists and professionals and specialists and advocates could all come together with coaches and student athletes and administrators from all these different departments and actually participate in a full-scale 3-day training that walks through a whole curriculum of how to implement a program specifically for student athletes that teaches and talks about healthy masculinity, uplifts primary prevention, emphasizes social and emotional learning, and takes a strength-based approach. And I would say that, you know, from the ways that you all have shared about the programs that you do, that many of those elements transpire and are present for you all. And so I guess I'm curious, you know, we've talked a little bit about building relationships and kind of getting buy-in and what it's like and what got you interested in the work and, you know, the value that you saw. And I'm curious to hear now. So once you've got your, you know, foot in the door, what do you actually do? You know, back to Kip's point about, you know, I would never, skip a beat at if I needed to learn how to do, you know, this specific type of skill for my team and we were lacking our defensive abilities, I would go and find out what's the best way to do this. How are different teams doing it? How are different coaches doing it? And so, yeah, I guess I'm just curious to hear what's the program that you all have been doing with the student athletes? How do you all talk about it? And maybe Susanna, do you want to kick us off and then we'll pass it over to...
Sure. So we do a modified version of the Healthy Masculinity Athletics project that y'all put together. And when I say modified version, it's really just some of the things were far more advanced than where our students were. And that's where we needed to make adjustments. We had people pushing back and, you know, really digging in to figure out what they were pushing back on and why, helped us kind of make some adaptations that have made it much more successful. So that's the program that we use, and it's supplemented by the general population on campus events and inviting students to each of those pieces. And I would say, in addition to that, it's really like, what did we do? I tried to find as many students to do it as possible, as quickly as possible. And I would say that that's the key, right? As much as I love presenting to students, they listen more when it's other students. They listen to their peers much more than they listen to me, or they listen to their coaches, but getting our coaches trained while also trying to to implement a program was not going to happen. So getting students to do it was key.
Thank you, Susanna.
Yeah, I would say for us, I mean, we haven't adopted a program of that sort of style, but we've done a lot of team specific programming, and that really started with kind of that relationship building and trying to understand what's unique about, you know, this coach and the team dynamic. So I think this kind of helped lay the groundwork for kind of varying levels of engagement among athletic staff. And I apologize, our garbage is getting picked up right now. I don't know if all that noise is happening.
You're a real human being. Real life is happening.
It's happening. All right. And it passed. Okay. To the next house. All right. Sorry, that was distracting.
You're good.
But yeah, the team specific programming is kind of where it started. And I guess, you know, just for some kind of pragmatic details, with the football team, like I said, working closely to understand, you know, not just like what are the kind of values, but, you know, they have, you know, a lot of teams have like maybe a graphic or like an acronym or, you know, some sort of thing, right, that they kind of call to or center focus on. So I took that our football coach, Isaac Parker, uses, and I built like a 2-hour program around masculinity and bystander intervention. And we implemented that during, you know, August when they were first coming to campus, and it was kind of embedded in between practices, just as like an overall component of their training. So that kind of got things started. And then, we've similarly done things with KIP's team, men's basketball. We've done some work with some of our mixed gender teams, which I think is a really important component, right? We've got swimming and tennis and golf and track, cross country, right? Like a lot of, I think there's a lot of potential there. I wouldn't say we've necessarily tapped into a lot of it, but I have worked closely with our head swimming coach, to similarly develop some programming. We did some work around healthy relationships for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So kind of noting when it feels opportunistic, connected to kind of broader prevention themes and efforts on campus. And then I would say kind of more coordinated efforts in the department started developing with kind of these one-offs happening with each team, and working with, our RED and our other admin staff, to really think forward, right? Instead of kind of in a reactionary or kind of team specific way. We had a lot of student athlete support to, really go big on these awareness months. So we had several teams do like domestic violence, like purple warm-up shirts, like during October. And actually that was started by a student athlete on our women's soccer team. So I'm not going to take credit for that. I'm going to give credit where it's due. But that was we kind of grew that idea, right? And so I was helping to connect, that idea with other coaches. I think for the first time ever, like our football program had like a domestic violence awareness game night. And, they put purple ribbons on the stickers on their helmets. And, we worked with our, the team doing all the graphics and videography, and they put together a video, kind of formalizing it, similar to Brenda Tracy's Set the Expectation, kind of modifying that a bit, but making a commitment on film, and all the students, not all of them, but many of them kind of contributing to that video. So those are some ways that we kind of went from just the individualized programming to each team to kind of growing it to be within the department. And that certainly was just the effort of, kind of multiple relationships and connections being built over time. I have one more idea of just like what we did. I don't know if you want me to keep going, but okay. Another thought, this came from Kip actually. So Kip, I remember a while back, had been traveling, right? And he came to me and said, there are these other schools that have these posters like in their locker rooms, and it's bringing attention to like either prevention issues or like where the sexual violence resources on campus. And, she said, we don't have anything like that. Like, what do we need to do about it? And I ended up meeting with some of our student athletes in the advisory committee, and I kind of outlined some of the pieces of a comprehensive prevention plan that we had put together kind of more broadly at the university. And one of those pieces, of course, being like the anti-oppression work and kind of the aspects of traditional gender norms and stereotypes, being part of the issue of dismantling violence. So we talked a lot about how can we kind of take this idea of a poster and prevention and make it really about countering the dominant narrative. And so we were thinking about stereotypes of masculinity, stereotypes of femininity, and wanting to flip the script there. So we came up with kind of different sayings to put on the posters. So for some of the women's teams, it had a statement like, "My voice matters." And then it would be a couple of the athletes on like the softball team or the women's basketball team. Or with, Kip, I don't know if you remember what your team did. I'm trying to like think back to what the examples were. Oh,
I was searching through my poster stuff on my to try to find it right now.
Yeah. Like the men's like power, a couple of things about like power is about respect, something to that effect. So we talked a lot about just how this could have so many different meanings and ways to influence, not just our home team, but like anyone else that's kind of interacting in that space. And how, over and over again, not only is it maybe shifting, whatever that dominant narrative is internally in our subconscious, but also just acting as like a positive affirmation, right? That helps kind of elevate the team culture.
Back to strength-based and
Yes.
that approach and lifting up, public education as a resource. Because I don't know if you were about to just say, Jay, but just real quick, Andrea, what you were just making me think of, was our Where Do You Stand campaign on bystander intervention and consent, and the question of asking where do you stand while role modeling bystander intervention scenarios and actual intervention strategies, is role modeling that kind of healthy masculinity and using positive identity building messaging as a way of promoting that the solution does exist and it is here in our community. And Susanna, it makes me think of I am the 95%. And Kip, I know we got to get to you, but Susanna, real quick, can you just say just 30 seconds, what is I am the 95%?
Yeah, we put up some posters from students identified by coaches, faculty, staff as people who were upstanding individuals in our community, and really highlighted the positive view. We highlighted the counter story of this is what masculinity can be and should be in our community. And so it was students from across the campus sharing why they are part of that. And it was really powerful for, especially for some of our student athletes who still had that mindset of, oh, she just hates us because she hates men. And for them to see like, no, I just really want this respectful masculinity to be present. And giving them the opportunity to share that helped build some of those relationships as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think if there's coaches listening, Jeremy, I think there's the overarching theme is don't be selfish in the struggle, right? So I think Andrea's done a great job of streamlining me into this thought process as, yes, I have this scheduled calendared program that I would like my athletes to occupy the platform we give them as men's basketball players authentically with education background and able to spread this work. But at the same time, Andrea's got so many great platforms she's working on. How can I get my guys over there to help lift up? So like she mentioned, we're wearing shooting shirts that for the DVA month, right? I'm going to send 2 of my seniors to go help her present to the Greek system here on campus. They've got the Women Crisis Shelter come in to be a table at a soccer game, get my team's butts there to set that table up, put the tent up. How can I help lift that platform? And then at the same time, really be intentional with the platform I'm creating for my own guys. And if I'm going to raise this up and say, we do this work, it better be informed. It better be accurate. It better be really invested in by not just quote unquote, the folks on campus that are supposed to do that, right? Where Susanna and Andrea get stuck with everybody's issues. What am I doing? Where's the level of my true buy-in? Because we know Coach Matt can speak to this. Kids will sniff you out. If you're passing this off as a one-off, that Andrea's coming into a hornet's nest and then she's leaving and you go right into film on a game the second she leaves, then there's no impact. And that's not on her, that's on you as the coach, because you didn't build an environment of authenticity. So I think there's a lot of this work. Coaches have to be willing to be vulnerable and make it something the guys know you give a damn about. So in these sessions, I can't be afraid. My staff, I've been really lucky to have assistants that we hire to this philosophy. We're going to share our failures as husbands. We're going to share our shortcomings as fathers. We're going to share things we did in the past as socialized men that looking back on now cause harm. And if you don't do that, then I don't think the work can have the impact, no matter how awesome the people you call on are, because your kids know you really don't care. You're just checking a box. So I think it's important if coaches are listening, if this isn't a constant, if you rely solely on something, you would never rely on the expert you brought in to coach to do it all for you. You would absolutely need their level of expert, but you would have to own it and continue the practice. So once again, I think that that's involved here. And then once you're confident that you put out a product in your players, then you need to activate them to go onto campus and help Andrea and Susanna do the work for everyone to raise platforms everywhere.
Yeah, and I would echo what Kip said on the coach buy-in is so important. And I talked with Susanna once we started doing the work at Doane, when we would start a presentation, and it happened more than once, not a lot, but it was very disappointing when we would start a presentation and then all of a sudden out of the corner of your eye you see that the coach looks at his phone and then he's slipping out the back door and not coming right back, and you get through the presentation 45 minutes later. And when I became the athletic director, I had told the coaches that we really need you in the room. We need you to be in the room. If we were bringing in a, like Kip said, if we're bringing in a guest coach to talk about defense, the defensive coordinator isn't going to leave the room and leave his team with this defensive expert. That'd be ridiculous. So you need to know what we're talking about and what we're meeting about with your team members. And I hope that you would want to know them on that same level. And even better yet, if we can get coaches involved in the activities, and then they're vulnerable as well, and they can share experiences that they had, like Kip said. So one other thing I wanted to, going back to what Susanna talked about with the 95% poster project we did at Doane. This was when I was still the football coach, and I had picked probably 8 or 10 guys from our roster that I thought would be really, really good, the right people for the posters. And after one of our team meetings, I'm sure it was during the spring semester, I called out the names and I said, I need you all to stick around for just a couple of minutes. I want to talk to you about something. And so the team exited the room, and there were a few guys milling around in the back that didn't leave right away. And I talked to the 8 or 10 guys and I said, here's what we want to do. I think you all would be great. Think about it. Let me know tomorrow. And almost to a man, they all came right up and said, yeah, coach, put me down. I don't need to wait until tomorrow. I'll do this. But the cool part was that the guys who were in the back of the room milling around, they came down, and I think we got another 4 or 5 that came right up and said, hey, coach, I heard what you were saying. Is there any reason that I can't do this? And, when that happened, then I knew we had something going, because the guys that we didn't pick out, that we didn't hand pick, wanted to be a part of that, and they wanted to be identified in that 95%, and they knew their picture was going to be up for everybody on campus to see, and it wasn't going to be embarrassing. It was going to be a source of pride. So anyway, so I wanted to add that too, that was, thinking back, was a really neat experience that we had.
Oh, thank you.
I wanted to add something on that, if that's okay. I guess the idea of coach buy-in, right? If just the general topic, doesn't compel you, or, I want to acknowledge too that there are feelings associated with, sexual interpersonal violence. There are experiences that, coaches have had with those issues. So, first of all, kind of validating and acknowledging that those barriers exist, but also thinking about, the students being, ready for this type of material and wanting this type of engagement and showing up, to a university, to, a sport, being so much more informed, I think, than students have been in the past. And whether that's from, Tumblr to TikTok, or just, a different sort of parenting approach over the years, I think that, they're really thirsty for this type of material and the ways to kind of engage, in a variety of kind of outlets during their college experience. I also think there's kind of that issue of, if you're not kind of bought in, on the issue alone, or you're not kind of tying it to what you may already do with your athletes, thinking about the university commitments or kind of department-wide initiatives, like how might we kind of attach explorations around masculinity or, anti-violence work to, broader concepts of, social justice or, anti-oppression in other forms. And I just think that's an important component too, that certainly over the last year, especially with all the attention on racial justice, like so many institutions are making commitments to doing more work. And this absolutely ties into those larger commitments. So how can you kind of show up and do your part in that way?
I wanted to add to it as well in terms of getting coach buy-in is you can actually put pressure from both directions, right? You can build something that is grassroots by working with students who are hungry for this work, while also working with administrators and down to set the expectation of what the work looks like. And so if you're putting pressure from both sides, it actually can help create that buy-in, because if you're hearing it from your students as well as your boss, that is very different than if you're just hearing it from me. And so I think that that's a really big piece of how to build that coach buy-in, is getting that student buy-in. And I would say, one of the things I said peer educators, and I have currently 13 peer educators, and 4 of whom are male student athletes, and the rest are for the general population. But they actually train together. They all share the same knowledge. They all share the same programming expertise, but that allows us to see that kind of buy-in that Kip was talking about, how they elevate the work that we're doing just because they understand the importance of the work that we're doing as well, and have that influence with their peer athletes.
Definitely. Thank you. Real quick, I was, just taking it all in, listening to you all. Thank you so much, Andrea, for talking about those intersectionality, that intersection of the work, right? But also I heard Susanna talk about, and Coach Kip talk about, the collaboration pieces. When you think of, the work that y'all are doing on campuses, and Susanna especially talked about collaboration, what other clubs or departments, campus departments or organizations have you all worked with? Because you mentioned it, but I know folks listening, there may be some connections there. Where did you go to? What were those other entities, or even in the community, those community-based organizations that you utilize and built relationships and help, actually engage those athletes and the coaches and athletic department as a whole?
I think it's finding them in other spaces as well, right? So we're engaging them through athletics, but what other spaces are they in? So is it a fraternity? Is it the theater department? Is it music? Are they in one of our student affinity groups? So how do we reach them in different spaces so they aren't just getting this message just for athletes? Because what that can very quickly become is the slippery slope of, oh, this office thinks athletes are the worst. And it's like, no, we don't. Here are all these other places where we're intersecting with you. So we've done a lot of collaboration just in terms of like Greek life. We built a program with our fraternities so that they had the buy-in. We've also infiltrated Greek life in terms of, every organization has to have a second level, like a 200 level bystander intervention program during Greek Week. And these are just things that are becoming norms. We're now putting together a female student athlete program so that it complements the work that we're doing with our male student athletes in a way that empowers them to set boundaries, in a way that helps them understand what those pressures of unhealthy masculine ideals are and how they may support some of those. And honestly, when we talk, hiring the right coaches, I reached out. We had Ryan Baumgartner is our women's basketball coach. And he previously was the assistant on the men's team. And I reached out to him and said, hey, I've got this program that I want to pilot. I'm going to need 4 weeks in a row, and I need an hour and a half. And his response was, I mean, yeah, I don't feel comfortable giving the program. Like, he really thought the expectation was that he would have to provide this pilot. And I said, oh, no. I just need your students. And so, but part of that is the culture that the men's basketball coach created around the work that we were doing with the men's basketball team, because Ryan was a part of that. He was always present and always there and understood the importance. And so it's about hiring the right people into our environments as well, and not just making those relationships.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, because you also acknowledged the many layers of the student athlete, right? Being a former student athlete, my identity was based around basketball and what I could do on the court, but it was many different layers to that, right? Many different interests. So, you are consistently talking about, you doing the work in a way, the work of actually meeting people and seeing, seeing where their interests are and really finding those connections. So thank you for that.
Part of our program requires our juniors, we kind of establish your freshman year, you're going to get inundated with education and unlearning. Sophomore year, you're going to start, really trying to live those models and teach it back to the freshman. And junior and senior year, you got to take our message and our belief system out into the world. So our juniors required to find community give back opportunities. For example, we've been landscaped at the Women and Children's Shelter in Kaiser, and then had a presentation inside from the director of the shelter about, hey, you're looking at consequences of harmful male actions, abusive relationships, domestic violence. So that's examples of allowing the guys, some ownership of this, and where can you take this as juniors. And then as seniors, they have to go give a capstone presentation to local, or if they're close enough to their home state to go to their own high school programs, or if they, we've got 8 states on the roster. So my guys from Texas, it's not easy to get them back and forth, right? So I'll partner up with the high school teams here in Salem, and their freshman through varsity program is going to get an hour with 2 of my seniors presenting, 21st century manhood, how to be a better person. So that's some of the connections you can find, but I try to put it on them, the onus on them of what they're passionate about as juniors, and then also teaching them, hey, 10 and 12-year-olds, it's still moldable clay. They haven't been immersed too much yet. Obviously social media and technology is getting farther and farther back in their age group. But it's an opportunity for you to go practice what you preach.
That's great to hear. It's truly, that, the social ecological model, right? That's truly community building, being on a college campus, we can be isolated at times, right? And we'd forget that we are in a state, in a town, in a city, and we're part of the community. So Coach Kip, I salute you for that, and all of you, because remembering that, and also too, they're young people, that are in community and looking at Willamette. They might attend your games, Coach, and know who you are and know some of your players, right? Because they can't go see LeBron in the Staples Center, right? They can go see you all. So that's a great way to give back, and they'll always remember you as a coach and those players, and they'll remember the Andreas and the Susannas that reached back out in the community. So thank you for sharing that.
Any others on that question from Jay? So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add one thing about our community to kind of the academic community. The students place a lot of emphasis on the relationships they have with their faculty, and kind of being here for a few years, you kind of notice, wow, this is such an important aspect, as you were saying, Jay, with their identity as a whole student athlete. And so, another kind of component is just the number of commitments that our students make, whether it's, being involved in a sport, in addition to maybe running for student government, in addition to being the president of the Nerf club, or, whatever other kind of student organization. I kept noticing how many student athletes were also we call them colloquium associates, teaching assistants, or as part of our first year programming for all of our incoming students, orientation leaders, or kind of some component of that piece of the puzzle, and kind of thinking through like how else can we maybe leverage their enthusiasm and, to use Susanna's language, infiltrate, right, the different areas on campus, whether it's that student club or perhaps even a classroom, and working with faculty or kind of who's in charge of these orientation programs, and kind of enhance whatever that enthusiasm exists. So that's been another kind of key piece to just growing the capacity and excitement around the topics.
Well, then I feel like what you all have just shared, leads me towards, one thing that I was just curious about, being mindful of those who are listening at home or at work, to hear some of those, stories about how this has all impacted the very students that we're talking about, being so multi-layered. And, I already feel like you in part answered the question that I wanted to ask, which was, what are some success stories that you feel like, you want to lift up, or you can think of right now, as it relates to the impact on the students themselves in particular. I feel like we've talked a lot about, some of the different components, with the team, the coach, the buy-in, the relationship building. But I'm curious too, if there's any other stories that, with students in particular that you all would want to lift up as we approach our last 10 minutes here all together.
I think a lot of that, Jeremy, the work is difficult for coaches, because you're so used to the scoreboard validating your week. I did X, Y, Z in practice. The scoreboard tells me if it was good enough, and then we go back and try to do better or worse. This work, you really do have to develop patience and have rabbit ears, so to speak, for anecdotal stories. I have a professor from across the street, our Atkinson Graduate School of Management, tells me, hey, I got 2 of your players in here, and we're having discussions on the glass ceiling and salary disruptions between genders. And your guys won't shut up. They keep talking. They're one of the few people willing to speak. So hopefully, you're like, what? I think I gave them a toolkit to where they're willing to take on difficult conversations. So I think that's part of this for coaches, is you're not going to get a medal. And you don't deserve a medal, but you can hear and see and kind of evaluate over the course of your player's existence some of those things you hopefully shaped for them that they can go and be bigger and better at.
I really wish that I had our data. So we have a pre-post for each year that we're doing, but I've only got like 2 teams who have finished the exercises they have for the year. So that's not a good enough sample size. But one of the things that that I often am tasked with doing is, if we have some sort of educational sanction for a student, and one of our athletes this year got in trouble for an aggressive incident that they had on campus, and he was tasked with meeting with me, and so we scheduled our meeting for the week after his team had their first activity with my peer educators. And he came in to the meeting, and normally what I say is, hey, tell me why you're here. why are we having this conversation today? Because I want to gauge how honest they're going to be and how forthcoming they're going to be, because that helps me figure out what is my best approach. And he told me, and then he goes, like, at first I didn't want to be here, and I didn't understand why I was, but learning kind of about the dominant and counter stories, like, that we talked about in our activity last week, like, I get it. I know I'm here. And it was the first time that conversation has happened like that. Like, normally the student is, I don't know why I'm here. This is dumb. Like, I hate it. And it takes some opening up for them. But this guy got it. And he got it because of the peer educators and the knowledge that they were sharing with them. That has been really incredible. And, I don't want to steal the thunder of the 2 peer educators that people will hear from next week, but just even seeing the growth of each of the peer educators, specifically the athlete peer educators, because they come to the work from a very different place. They come from wanting to make their teams better. They don't necessarily come from the same space as the general population peer educators, where mostly they're coming from activist backgrounds. They know the pieces of this work. And so seeing the growth in the knowledge of the peer educators, but also in the understanding of how oppressions are intersectional, and really being there to support each other and understand that our work matters at such granular levels for so many people has been really incredible to witness.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's certainly a lot of wonderful anecdotes. And sometimes those are little gems, right? Like Kip was saying, we don't get a medal or trophy or whatnot. And those help kind of instill the hope and sustain us in moving forward. I think there's also something to be said too about how we need to incorporate more of the assessment pieces into the work. And I would say just, more recently, I've been personally trying to commit to doing more of this, and, was able to follow through on that, at least kind of on a small scale earlier in the fall. And, one of the most common kind of responses, after we did, a very long program with the football team, was, I want to learn more. Right. Like, so it just I was able to actually demonstrate, right, real time and with, words from the students, that this is material that they want to keep working on. And not that I needed necessarily a lot more of that buy-in from the coach, but it was helpful to just illustrate the need, and certainly helped to keep me focused and going, with what we were doing. So I'd say that. And then I think Kip already spoke to this, but two of his players, actually it was more than two, a handful of them last year, as we were trying to kind of build some of our own peer education programming, specifically for our fraternities. I knew I was lacking resources and time, right, to kind of jump on what the current need was. So I reached out to Kip and just said, hey, I need some of your guys, because I know they've had multiple years of this sort of programming, and I need to rely on their expertise at this point. So was able to meet with them, and we did a lot of great work with some of the fraternities on campus because of that. So that was just a huge kind of support, that we could kind of lean on each other in that way.
If I may, I wanted to echo some of what you just said, which is, really listening to the students that you are presenting to, and trying to figure out what it is they need. One of the things that I have two baseball player peer educators, and they told me that they were often getting pushback after an activity. And so baseball team was fine during the activity. Some people were quiet, but it was the ones who were quiet who actually did not understand why we were doing this. And so the conversation then became about that we're not framing it correctly for these students to understand why we're doing the work. And so we ended up creating just a way to frame the conversation. So we have actually seen a decrease in that pushback from a lot of athletes, but specifically from our baseball team. And that is to the credit of the peer educators. I probably wouldn't have noticed because they weren't pushing back for me. They were pushing back for my peer educators. And so it's really important to listen to the students that you're presenting to and respond to their needs.
And I think seeing some of the peer educators that have risen to the top with Susanna over the years, people that but would not have expected, there is some really neat, maybe pleasant surprises there. But one quick story, I guess, when you talk about small wins or whatever it might be. And I think it was the first year that we were doing one of the exercises with the football team when I was still the football coach at Doane. And it's the real man exercise, which segues into the strongest man. And in the real man exercise, we talk we present two pictures of two men that are very public, national or global public figures, and then the guys talk about, okay, who would society label as the real man and why? And you're pointing out, okay, that these are toxic labels. These aren't real expectations of real people. And then you turn around and get into the strongest man. Who's the strongest man that you have ever known in your real life, that you've actually known? And we were in our auditorium on campus with 130 or 140 young men. And so we had a microphone stand on each side of the auditorium, and we had lines on each side that were probably 5 or 6 deep as guys were coming down and giving their personal stories, which was really cool. And then in my ear, I had a voice, and one of our guys said, "Coach, what if the strongest man I ever had was my mom?" I said, "Well, get up to the mic and tell it. Is that okay?" Yes, absolutely. So he got up and talked about his mom and what she had meant to him. And it's just one of those things, one of those, like, yes, we're getting somewhere with this work. This is really, really good stuff. So anyway, I want to share that.
Coach Matt, you just moved me because it's right. Those are success stories, and the challenge, I think, in prevention work is showing and pointing out that we know that it works. And these are the exact kind of stories that we like to lift up, again, taking a strength-based approach, and wanting to practice appreciative inquiry and ask, what are we doing right? And how do we know that these stories are the kinds of things that I'm hoping that those who are tuned in and listening and able to view this later on can point to as, motivators to begin or continue or expand, deepen, build the work that they are doing and are going to do. And that you all have taken such courage and strength and leadership to be here today to share some of those stories and to share the work that you all have done, the relationships that you've built. And so I just want to say thank you as we wrap up and just offer, before any final closing remarks, the last piece there with, what are some successes with students, stems back to that question of, so what are we doing to sort of pass the baton and allow the success to continue? And so I'm just very excited to hear from the student athletes directly next week and put their ideas in conversation. And again, I just want to lift up all your work and just say thank you so much for being here today. And Jason, is there anything you want to add?
No, I just want to echo that. I want to say thank you to all of you. We have built and sustained relationships and continue to do so with all of you in your campuses. Thank you for caring about our young people and creating safer spaces for them to learn and continue to be leaders in other ways, right? That led the layers that I talked about, recognizing their many layers in their leadership. So thank you so much, and I appreciate all of your voices today.
Any final comments or anything you all want to share before we hop off?
I just want to share that I got a preview of what you're going to hear next week, and you should definitely be here. So they're all fantastic. So.
I agree. We've got some great students speaking next week, and I'm just excited that we're able to, not only, create impact on our own campus communities, but now they're, going to be on this platform to share that experience kind of more broadly. So thank you for kind of helping create that opportunity for them too, Jeremy and Jason.
Cosign, super thankful, super excited for what happens next, and appreciative of everyone's work.
Thank you all again. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the spring weather, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing the relationship with you all. So again, thank you, and